Hi everyone, and welcome to lesson 9 of our GCSE series on An Inspector Calls. If you haven't seen any of this content before, we're going through all the characters, themes, model answers, paragraphs, context, everything that you need to be successful in writing a great GCSE Inspector Calls essay. As I said, this is week 9, so you're quite late to the party if this is your first video, but don't worry, it's all on my channel. You can go back and you can look over the videos that we've done on Mr. Burling, Eric, Eva, Inspector, Gerald, Mrs. Birling, Sheila, so all the main characters. Every one of those videos has lots of key quotes for the characters, model answers for the characters, so go check them out. We've also done the theme of class division. We've talked a lot about capitalism versus socialism generally. We've talked about corruption a lot generally. Today's lesson, I wanted to go through some model paragraphing and answers with you. So we've actually got a Mrs. Birling essay that we're going to go through, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of looking at a real student's essay. I think that this has the potential to be upgraded pretty quickly to a level 9. So we'll look at what the good things about this essay are, and then we'll look at how to improve it even more. So the question was, roughly speaking, how is Mrs. Birling presented? Obviously, it was a slightly longer question than that, but ultimately, how is Mrs. Birling presented? And we're going to look at how to unlock level 9 from where it is right now. So that's what we're going to do today. Diving in. Oh, that's a bit annoying. Maybe I have to go down here. Maybe I have to make myself a bit smaller. I mean, no one's really looking at me anyway, are they? So I suppose it doesn't really matter if it's smaller. So yeah, diving straight in, Priestley uses the character of Mrs. Birling to represent the corrosive influence of power in the hands of unfeeling authority. I mean, come on now. That is a heck of a point to start a paragraph with, right? The corrosive influence of power in the hands of unfeeling authority. So beautifully expressed. Mrs. Birling enjoys a great deal of power because of her social position and has the ability to destroy the life of both Eva and, ironically, her own grandchild and son, actually, right? Destroys her son's life, really, too. This horrific event serves as an emblem for the way in which power, when used unfairly, not only affects others, but also has repercussions for the whole of society. Mrs. Birling enjoys power as the wife of a wealthy man, but is also clearly born into a wealthy family. She enjoys relative power in her own house and also in public life, as seen in her role in the charity organization, which refuses to help Eva. So I'll be honest, generally speaking, I always recommend to my GCSE students, don't worry about doing an introduction. This is a very good introduction, and a lot of the model answers that I've been giving across all the different texts, so whatever text you're doing, check out my channel, I've got videos on it. I've said actually a little intro doesn't hurt, like especially it with a good model answer. So this one introduces Mrs. Birling really well. I'm starting to sort of see something that I'm growing from this. You know, I've been an English teacher for over 10 years. I've been an examiner for a lot of the different years, marking papers for students like you who are about to sit their GCSEs. But I have to say, like, when an intro is written like this, it does a lot to show that the student understands the character or understands whatever they're answering the question on. So this is not a bad thing to do. But if it were me in the real exam, I would probably have dived straight into some quotes on how Mrs. Birling represents the corrosive influence of power. So rather than saying about how it destroys Eva's life and the grandchild and stuff, I'd have probably just tried to go straight in with some quotes. But it's a very solid introduction. We see from reading this, don't we, that this student really knows Mrs. Birling and how Mrs. Birling fits into the narrative of the play and what she represents and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's a good intro. There's a lot for us to learn from this. The audience's first impression of Mrs. Birling is as a powerful but unsympathetic character. Again, good, strong point to start with. Priestley presents her as a cold woman, so we've finally got some quotes in here, as an unlikable character through her speech, views, and interaction with other characters. Mrs. Birling's power allows her to act in a patronizing manner to everyone around her. She's described to be her husband's social superior, one of my favorite quotes for Mrs. Birling, showing how she was of a higher class and has married down. I've talked about how Mr. Burling married up, and obviously that means that she married down. She often scolds him as if he is a child, and when he behaves in a way that is not viewed as acceptable by the higher classes, she tells him he mustn't do that. This is illustrating to an audience how she is controlling, and the word mustn't makes her speech sound like a command, further emphasizing this point. Now, here we get to one of the first upgrades of this essay. So we've got, a cold woman, husband social superior, and mustn't do that. We've got 3 quotes, and how many techniques have we got so far? I think 0, right? So a cold woman, obviously you would talk about the symbolism of the word cold, how it suggests she's unlikable because she doesn't have much care in her interactions with other characters. So you could change this, make this a bit better, 802 for most exam boards, analysis basically, yeah? Her husband's social superior. I think I would personally talk about the sibilance, the S sounds. So I would talk about how the bitter tone that is created through this, maybe there's a bitterness to her that she married down, even though Mr. Burling was a wealthy man. Or maybe it sort of reflects the upper class views of the time, the fact that marrying down was typically looked down upon. So this is like, something that is an area of tension in their marriage, perhaps. And then finally, he mustn't do that. Well, the word mustn't makes her speech sound like a command. That's true, but skip all that. It's called an imperative sentence, right? Imperative sentence, because she is literally commanding him. So you don't have to say it's the word mustn't makes it happen. Mustn't do that is an imperative sentence, which shows she's literally commanding him and commanding her children. Commanding her children, she's, you could add in here a quick, quote of how she controls or manipulates them, like, Sheila, I don't know what's gone into you, or whatever. But, there's already 3 quotes in this paragraph, so I don't think we need more quotes necessarily. When Sheila begins to speak out and take responsibility, Mrs. Birling quickly shuts her down and tells her she's behaving like a hysterical child. The patronizing tone of her voice insinuates her superiority. The words hysterical child show the view she has about her children. She thinks that Sheila is behaving in a childish manner. This is ironic because Sheila is the one who is acting more maturely, more like an adult, but as she is speaking out, Mrs. Birling is quick to scold her. So overall, loads of great quotes on Mrs. Birling. Hopefully you've got that from this, if nothing else. Analysis needs a bit of work. The other big thing for most of the exam boards is we need context, right? There's no context in here so far whatsoever. So actually, that's not totally fair. There's a little bit of context with marrying down, but she doesn't really go into enough depth, perhaps, on like how it's would have been looked down upon in the Edwardian audience. But because the play was written in 1945 and performed in 1945, a lot of that class division and the Edwardian era views were being taken over and removed by post-war England, right? So there's some more context that could be added in here for sure. It is still a pretty good answer though. I mean, it's still definitely level 7, level 8, somewhere on that borderline. And then those upgrades I just gave you will get it up. Normally I call these videos average essay upgraded. I'm not sure if I can call this an average essay so far. I think it's above average so far. Priestley also portrays Mrs. Birling's power as a byproduct of the class system. She looks down on the lower classes, and Priestley clearly illustrates this through her opinion of Eva. Yeah, so this is again a very good, strong point to start a paragraph, isn't it? She constantly refers to her as a girl of that class, as if she is not worthy of respect. When Eva comes to Mrs. Birling, friendless and penniless, she refuses to help her and claims that she's lying about rejecting money by explaining that a girl of that sort would never refuse money. Okay, so this bit here is not brilliant. The problem with it is that the student has started to actually like just explain the narrative. So, Eva comes to Mrs. Birling for help and Mrs. Birling refuses that help and claims that she's lying about the money. All of that bit is not necessary. It's actually a bit waffly. Like, do you think that us as examiners haven't read an Inspector Calls? I've read it like, I'm flexing here by accident, but I've read it over 100 times. I know this play inside out, back to front. So I don't need to be told what happens in the narrative. It doesn't help add any analysis or any real moving forwards. It's only a couple of lines in this bit, so it's not the end of the world, but just, you don't need to waste word count on it. Don't explain what happens in the narrative. Explain what the characters are actually like doing through the narrative or the quotes and how they create the effects, right? So the fact that Mrs. Birling rejects a friendless and penniless Eva and claims a girl of that sort would never refuse money, the dismissive tone shows that she doesn't care for the girl's problems. You could keep it that short. You don't have to do all the extra stuff that this student has done. It's very demoralizing language as well. That class separates her. A girl, it's very dismissive, patronizing again. So she's not only patronizing her daughter and son and everyone, but calling a grown woman a girl is very patronizing as well. So you could talk about the patronizing language symbolized by the word girl. So there's more, there's more analysis to be done here. She shows no remorse or regret, as she believes that this view of the class system is justified. Although Priestley presents Mrs. Birling as powerful, it is made clear that she refuses to use that power for good. Her refusal to take responsibility for her actions is very plain at the end of the narrative, as is her propensity to put the blame on other people. At first, she explains that the father of the child is responsible. The certain tone shows how she is pushing the blame away from her son. However, this statement is ironic because the father of the child is Eric, her own son. Okay, so one other thing that we're seeing here with this student is they're using tone a lot, dismissive tone, certain tone, patronizing tone, etc., right? Don't use tone that much. I'm starting to now feel that maybe I can call this an average essay again in my title, because there are some issues. I still think it's like, would sit at a level 6 or a level 7 as I see it at the moment. But don't just talk about tone all the time. That's not good. Try and have a diverse range of sort of things that you talk about. The father of the child is responsible. You can then talk about how, you know, she doesn't seem to care about anyone else within the society. This is also starting to change the point at the beginning, potentially, unless we say, and I think this is a good thing to add here, that when Mrs. Birling talks about the father of the child, because, and we can add context here, because class division was so deep in Edwardian England, it was very unusual for an upper class man or woman to sleep with or spend time with a working class man or woman. It was unusual that they would fraternize like that in their spare time. They'd maybe work together, but you know, and the upper class person inevitably would own the factory or manage the factory or whatever. But it was very rare for this to happen outside of that. The only time it would have really happened would have been prostitution. And obviously this isn't exactly prostitution, because Eric sadly forced himself on Eva, raped her, but she was selling her body. And that's the one rare time where the upper class would have fraternized with the working class more obviously. So anyway, all of that is to say that I think when Mrs. Birling says, "Oh, go find the father," she really thinks that she's screwing up a working class man that has done this to Eva, not her own son or anyone upper class. She couldn't imagine an upper class person doing this. Side note, which I think would be really cool to go real level 9, is you could talk about how when they're talking about Alderman Megati, Mrs. Birling can't believe that Alderman Megati is a notorious womanizer and stuff. So she is also being a byproduct of the class system, as it says here. Part of that byproduct is being quite ignorant to the world around her. She doesn't seem to know what's going on very well. So again, she's trying to deflect the blame from herself and put it on other people. As Mrs. Birling doesn't change, perhaps this is why a second inspector calls at the end of the play. Priestley may be showing how this is her second chance to change her ways. I don't like that ending. I don't think that's true. I think that the ending is meant to show justice and retribution. I think that when the second inspector calls, it's going to be the same inspector, and it's going to be that they've had their chance and now they're actually going to be screwed for the fact that they didn't change their ways. I don't think they get another chance. So I disagree with that. And I don't think that it, you know, based on the fact they're really scared and the inspector leaves saying, you know, if we don't learn this, it's going to end in fire and blood and anguish. I don't think that there's a second chance coming there. So I disagree with that. It wouldn't mark you down. There's no negative marks, but it would just not get any marks. So it's just word count that doesn't do anything for us. Mrs. Birling is presented throughout the play as a narrow-minded, patronizing character by Priestley through her views and responses to Eva's suicide. Brilliant point. In doing so, Priestley's wider points about the unfair distribution of power and the corrupting influence it has upon society and human life emerge. Mrs. Birling's power is a danger to the people who need it most, like her husband and by extension, the other people of members of her class. Mrs. Burling is shown to be irresponsible, unfeeling, and unsympathetic. Her social power is not used responsibly, and as Priestley's story makes clear, she and her kind need sweeping from power if society is to be a fair place. This is the worst paragraph so far. Sorry to whoever wrote this, but this is, it seems like, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I see what she or he is, I think she is trying to do here. So trying to conclude, I don't think it's a great conclusion. I didn't even know it was a conclusion from reading it there again, unfortunately. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. So it does talk about narrow-minded, patronizing, views in response to Eva. In a conclusion, you do want to build upon what you've said in the rest of the essay. So actually, it's really not as bad as I think, because I was thinking it was another main paragraph. I wasn't thinking it as a conclusion. It's actually, as I'm rereading it, not that bad. It does wrap things up. Remember that your conclusion should be a bit of a highlight reel if you do a conclusion. For most of my students, I would say don't do a conclusion though, okay? So the biggest single thing that is missing from this essay is really context. There's a little bit of context here in this conclusion, but it's not enough. There's a little bit on class division, but again, it's not enough. The biggest single way of upgrading this essay, which has done quite a good job of AO1, so understanding, quotes, some good analysis. The single biggest thing though is context for this one, right? Talk about Priestley being a socialist, talk about Edwardian society, talk about post-war Britain, and particularly the fact that, 1945, Labour wins in a landslide, 1948, the NHS is formed, 1918, women get the right to vote for the first time, even though it's unequal with men in 1918. 1928, women get equal right to vote with men. So when Sheila is disenfranchised in this, for example, and Mrs. Birling is dismissing our girls of that class, all that stuff, it's easy for a woman with as much power as Mrs. Birling, even though she wasn't completely equal with her husband at this stage, to throw that power around against other women, particularly other women, and other working class men, I would say. But then you can talk about how contextually this is being changed, and the views of Mrs. Birling are very outdated to the audience that would have watched it and enjoyed it in the 40s and the 50s and even up to today. So yeah, context. So it's the same as always, really. I've said before, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Strong points at the beginning, couple of quotes, analyze them deeply, get into the techniques. Sometimes this student has done that really well. Some reader response, some context, try and get in depth about that, try and add some stuff about the playwright. That's how you upgrade this to a level 9. But there's a lot of stuff you could learn from this essay. So I hope you've got something from that. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please do comment or question down below. I always get back to my questions and comments. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.